Hi, I'm Gordon Lamphere with the Real Finds Podcast, the podcast series where we have in-depth discussions with key entrepreneurs, scientists, and activists who are shaping real estate, and as a result, our world. On today's podcast, we have a long discussion with Sara Maffey. On the podcast, we discuss the speed of property technology adoption, the value add of a highly localized data set, placemaking, and the siloed nature of our current property technology data, and a path towards a more data-driven society. It's well worth a listen. Sara, great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Gordon.
So I just wanted to start off. Can you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners?
Sure. So I'm Sara Maffey. I'm the head of corporate strategy at Local Logic. And I got started sort of in the built world by studying architecture and urban design at NYU, and worked in construction management on labs in New York City for a while, got my MBA from Yale, then went into economic development because it happened to be the time right after the market crashed in 2008. Great timing to be making that transition from construction into real estate. And learned the public side of it, eventually made my way to commercial real estate at Cushman doing site selection. And then found my way to Transwestern, where I was doing just a variety of different consulting services. And that's where I was actually pitched Local Logic and just kind of nerded out on our solutions and data. And, 2+ years later, here I am today.
Well, there's nothing wrong with nerding out, particularly around real estate on this podcast. So,
the right place.
So how was it kind of working at a firm in comparison to the entrepreneurial life? Because I think they are distinctly different, and there are very few people in the real estate game that have done both. So I was curious if you could kind of touch on that.
Yeah, I think it's almost a shame for both sides not to have done both. I think it's been incredibly valuable that I was able to work with so many different brokers and in different markets around the country in the work that I'm doing today. It's just like I use my experience every day. I think that, working at a startup, you have the opportunity to move really quickly and to try new things. And it's really built into the culture of how you're trying to solve for things and discover new solutions. So probably some lessons learned on both sides, but I think that that's probably the main difference, just the speed of activity.
So let's talk about the speed of activity. Everyone in real estate who's been watching in comparison to other industries has seen that the speed of development in terms of PropTech is significantly less in real estate than I would say a broad range of other, real estate adjacent professions, be it manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare, you can go down the list. And I'm not going to beat a dead horse and keep hitting real estate for that, but I'm curious from the PropTech side, why you think that might be, because I know that we've had a lot of folks on that have their own hypotheses, but as somebody who uniquely is placed kind of at the junction of the two, I'm curious what you think, Sara.
Well, I think it's that a lot of folks have been successful for a long time doing what they've been doing. And, I think in moments of uncertainty, there is an opportunity to start thinking about maybe using more data or more tech to remove some of the uncertainty. But I think it's also where PropTech is. It's a relatively nascent world, and I think that it's going to kind of, you'll see more adoption as PropTech becomes more mature, and finds product market fit more and more. So I think it's just kind of two industries on their own sort of path of learning about each other and finding the right fit.
So going to market fit, right? Mm-hmm. We're not just talking theoretically. You have a product that you're working with. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. So Local Logic is using data to quantify everything outside the four walls of an asset. And we're really asset class agnostic, although we've really chosen to focus on more residential type use cases like multifamily and SFR and short-term rental. just because we got started originally, our original suite of products has really incredible and growing market share on the residential sort of home search side of things.
And so I'm curious from our perspective because there's certainly a lot of data that comes out in the real estate world, particularly from residential data, right?
Hmm.
And residential has been overwhelmingly quick to adopt in comparison to commercial. A lot of property technology as well as data driven metrics. And so I'm curious, what are the leading metrics you're seeing that are driving traffic in the prop tech world for commercial users?
I think that what we've discovered is on the residential side, we have our proprietary location scores, which are really um, proprietary algorithms of many different data sets in some cases that kind of roll up to things like walkability or schools or parks or things like that. On the commercial real estate side, I think what we're discovering is as we build models to predict various, performance metrics, for example, it's sometimes the underlying data that's really driving that performance. And so, as you might imagine, market to market, asset class to asset class, everyone has their own specific investment thesis that they're looking for.
Yes.
So, I think the key thing is like our ability to be flexible and customizable and have so many different data points that we can kind of meet the needs of a variety of different investment theses. But I think where we also add value is understanding the value of all of those different data points. And we can make suggestions around where to begin, because I think sometimes, as you kind of mentioned earlier, because we're earlier on in the adoption curve of using data and technology, sometimes it can be overwhelming to have so many options, um, especially when it comes to location characteristics. Everybody has their sort of boots on the ground things that they're looking for, but how do you translate that into data? And I think that's something that, because we've done so much modeling on real world portfolios and use cases, we can really help our clients understand where to begin with that.
I definitely like to dive a little deeper into that because
Mhm.
I think for anybody who hasn't worked with data before, and I'll date myself as somebody who I remember the first time I started using computer code, it was C++, right?
Mhm.
So there have definitely been transformations in the coding world. And one of the biggest things I think that folks who aren't used to at least modern data analytics is the volume that you're working with of data. If you don't know what you're looking for, or you don't have a good data scientist that's accurately and efficiently putting it together,
Mhm.
it's like bailing the ocean with a bucket, right?
Yeah, I
So
agree.
so I'm curious, what are the leading metrics that you're driving? And I know you can't dive too into proprietary metrics, and and certainly I'm curious, to throw something out asset class specific, but like
Mhm.
for example, a retail user.
Mhm.
What are the leading metrics that you think drive, one's location, location, location?
Yeah, we haven't specifically focused on retail yet, but I think that retail is looking at, essentially the size and income level of the market that they could potentially serve from a location. And another use case that we've seen when we have looked at retail is also just being able to do a void analysis of where are your competitors, and also where might you co-locate with other brands or types of retail that often will help you drive traffic to whatever that retail location is. So, there's certain synergies that happen, and having access to all the data on rooftops and other retail, that surrounds this given location is super valuable. And it's interesting because retail really plays into site selection for multifamily and even SFR or build to rent communities, because we hear all the time, people are chasing the Whole Foods or the Trader Joe's. They want to have those kind of amenities near the housing that they're building, because that's going to drive the desirability of leasing those spaces to families and renters. So, um, it's interesting because it is really specific. Like sometimes walkability could be great. Sometimes you're actually looking for more of a car-friendly location. Depending on the unit mix, you might want to be near schools, and so all of that kind of drives not only what you're building, but it can also drive where sort of like a go no go decision making process. And so what we've done is like we do have essentially prepackaged data for specific asset classes. That's really like a way to suggest where to begin. So um, for short-term rental, you might want to be in a really vibrant area that's walkable, but depending on how long you're imagining that average stay is going to be, you might also want to throw in being near grocery stores or convenience stores. Restaurants are usually important to that, cultural things to do nearby. And again, like it just depends on individual investment thesis. It could be, being near a commercial hub where people are going to be going to have meetings or going to events and things like that. So um, we could just get into the weeds on. I mean, we could get into the weeds on every asset class of this.
Look, I'm a data driven guy. All right.
Mhm.
I mean, I came into a business that was a phenomenal boutique brokerage business, but was using early 2000s technology in the late 2010s. And we
Mhm.
really revolutionized not only our brokerage business, but also our landlord leasing business by
Mhm. Mhm.
technological adoption. So I'm fine getting into the weeds.
Yeah.
That's all right with me.
Well, and isn't it cool, like when you're putting together like a survey, for a tenant, like I always found it to be a little challenging to just kind of qualitatively describe the area to a tenant that was coming to look at this market from out of town. They have no like sense of context, and that's why like it's like we're just getting started with use cases of this kind of data, because if you think about like finding the cultural fit, the right neighborhood, the right corner in a neighborhood or submarket for that tenant, like where will they really be able to fit the best, have everyone come in, there's just so many different aspects to it, and location can get super granular. And I think a lot of times, you probably know this too, like a lot of the data is available at just not the right level of granularity. You're looking at things at such a sort of aggregated census block or, submarket or zip code. And it can be really hard to um, drill down and make the kinds of suggestions that clients really are looking for.
Look, in the Chicago market, I always joke a few blocks can be the
Yeah.
difference in walkability from walkable to totally not walkable at all,
Hmm.
right? Uh, in any world, you have absolutely granular chasms that divide people, be it transportation metrics, be it metrics of um, you know, technological adoption, be it maybe the block isn't electrified to the level that it needs to be electrified, and that could be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of an issue.
Well, and
Um,
Chicago is interesting too because you have a river that's cutting through things, and like if you're just using certain tools that are really looking at distance measurements and not actual accessibility and walkability, without knowing that area and using the right data tools, it can be tough. So I love that market example.
okay, as the crow flies,
As the crow
walkability is
flies.
very different in June as it is in February.
Yes, so true. Yeah.
So, kind of tackling that, I'm curious in particular, what has been your most unique granular example of a way that you've helped an organization kind of find and locate? Because I always find it as a challenge
Hmm.
sometimes, and this is not you pitching to me, this is you pitching to my 55, 65-year old investor
Hmm.
who who wants to use prop tech. What's that best example case that you think you can throw at us?
I to me, and again, I feel nerdy when I get into this, but
Nerd out, it's
um,
fine.
I love it when you're dealing with a client who has a portfolio of prior decisions that they've made, right? They've decided to invest in these properties at some point for some reason. And a lot of times what I found is that people don't necessarily go back and like reconsider that decision making process. Once it's done, you're rolling with it, and obviously for a certain hold period. But I think that there's so much information that can be gleaned when you start to look at the performance of all those assets and then layer in all of these other data points, granular data points on location characteristics. And then patterns start to emerge that you can use really powerfully to make future investment decisions. And so for me, like that's what gets me really excited about it, that you could like actually learn from other past decisions that this client has made to make better decisions in the future, and maybe there's outliers that come from that kind of analysis where you're like, oh, I should probably divest from this asset like yesterday, and I didn't even realize it because it was kind of just blending in to the general portfolio there.
Look, that's certainly an element of investing, which is one of the greatest challenges of the human mind, right? It's the logical fallacy of sunk losses, right? And
Yeah.
so um, I think without data, it's almost impossible to ever realize that maybe you are past that point of no return and it's time to bail. So I'm always a fan of metrics that help us improve our human processing, right? And so on that note, improving our human processing, what I'm curious, and this is probably what I'm the most interested in on the podcast, is if you had a quick statement or quick thesis on, you have your investor who's uh, let's say they're a late stage technological adopter for
Mhm.
PropTech, and you have to make a pitch because look, there's a lot of brokers and a lot of investors that do listen and follow our content, but
Mhm.
some of them aren't as technologically advanced. What's your pitch? Why is property technology worth investing in rather than a marketing campaign or
Mhm.
going out and getting another email list? Why is property technology the future?
Well, I can't pitch all prop tech. I think that you know, if you are a later stage adopter, then I think it's important to know, like, find the thing that's going to help you move the needle for your business. And, um, in the case of local logic, I think that the way that we're improving the performance of financial modeling is really where we add value. And so if you want to be able to more accurately help your clients understand, rent prediction or cap rates or, any host of performance metrics, the data can help you do that. And it can actually just augment what you're already doing. So I can't speak for everything, but I know that we have like a real value add in processes that you're probably already doing in Excel, and we can fit right into that.
So on that,
Mhm.
I'm curious. You mentioned Excel.
Mhm.
Are there
I'm
other
I'm speaking
platforms?
to the late stage adopters.
I okay. But beyond Excel,
Mhm.
right? Are there other software platforms that would be standard data analytics platforms that you guys integrate with, or are you relatively unique? Are you using easy SQL? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we really try to meet people where they are. So, you know, whether your company's decided to use Power BI, or you're just using desktop Excel, or your company has created an internal platform that knows how to integrate APIs, we can provide you with a bulk delivery in CSV. You can do whatever you want with it. We can also, tie in and have whatever your platform looks like automatically ping our APIs. It really just depends on where you are. We try to be really flexible with how we deliver our solutions.
So the other question that I always like to ask with prop tech
Mhm.
in particular is, we live in a world where property technology has been very much adopted by kind of the high end of the real estate venture capital and
Mhm.
private equity world. And for your average adopter, you might say, maybe it's not in the cards, right? Maybe it's not a fully democratized platform that suits to everyone.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that adoption of highly data-driven technology like yours
Mhm.
is in the cards for every investor, or do you think we're going to see a stratification in terms of property technology?
Um,
I know this is like a
yeah.
huge question, right? But
No,
well,
I don't think it should be. I think that um you might be seeing that because more institutional investors are coming from more of like a financial background where it's like they understand the value of data and modeling and data science, and they have that capacity in house. But I don't think you have to do that even today with our solutions. Like, pretty easy to run regressions or to ask us for our suggestions and use our prepackaged data to get started immediately with making those kinds of decisions. We have an alpha of a platform that's like literally anybody could use it. Pretty cool. And so I don't think so. I think we're actually going to see, just more and more adoption of using data because with the right solutions, you don't have to be a large institutional player to be able to access those kinds of insights. Because ultimately, um, I know the whole Moneyball for real estate idea. I mean, anybody can do that. But we've got a variety of different ways of interacting with people and making it easy to access our insights.
so I'm kind of in doubling back to Moneyball, right? Because that's look, Moneyball's a great film.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt's terrific. So Jonah. In terms of going through and understanding how someone truly does game real estate in that way, do you
Mhm.
have any particular examples of folks? And you don't have to name names or even metro areas, but any examples where you think folks have used your platform to really, you know, moneyballize the commercial real estate world?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the examples I'm thinking of aren't in a specific market. They're really like larger, sort of like national scale or international scale portfolios. But um, I think it's the idea of using the data you have internally with and marrying it with outside data and understanding actionable insights from that. So a lot of times there's just like that disconnect. And I think that firms don't even understand how much data they have internally to help make decisions. And so maybe that's like the starting place, and then adding our data on top of it can really help.
Well, Sarah, we're getting to that time,
Oh,
and I know you have I know how you have a lot to say, but I have a showing to get to, and we both have tough schedules. So I'm going to break into our final four.
all right, let's do it.
And look, I'm not much of a hooper, at least anymore. I certainly can't dunk. But our final four is usually a great way to get to know people.
Okay.
So, what I'd like to start off with is one of my favorite questions of our final four. And I think you're particularly adept at potentially talking about this topic, which is where do you see the future of prop tech going? Because and I know it's a big world and it can be a long question,
Mm-hmm.
but if you could address where you see prop tech is headed.
Oh, wow. I could answer that in so many different ways. I think that, there's going to be more and more crossover from people who have real commercial real estate experience moving into prop tech. And as you said, prop tech really did start on the resi side. I think we're starting to see more solutions come out that are beyond just sort of like operational efficiency and risk management type things and rental platforms. We're starting to get into so many more parts of the day to day of commercial real estate and that we can solve with tech. The biggest thing for me, I guess there's two sort of pieces to this. And yeah, I guess I could talk about this for a while, but
That's fine. You can ramble on. That's fine.
one is really kind of where I was going, where like commercial real estate will hopefully get more of a handle, and maybe PropTech helps with this, more of a handle on their internal data and starting to use it across different silos within the organization, like acquisitions being separate from asset management. There's so many lessons to be learned, valuations. There's just like all these different teams that could be sharing data internally and then matching that with other data solutions. And I think that there are going to be more and more accessible ways of doing that. And it's going to become more prevalent. And so I guess when I think about the future of prop tech, I also think of the future of commercial real estate because they're really intertwined in that way. And then I think the second piece of it is there's so much conversation right now around ultimately what boils down to like the human experience and in spaces, whether that's the workplace or housing. And I think that that's another place where PropTech will continue to add value and potentially allow us to have assets that are, really more healthy and environmentally friendly and all of those things that when we start to use technology to actually solve for those needs, it's just going to be an exciting place to be, literally.
I mean, it's certainly an exciting place to be these days,
Mm-hmm.
especially going and looking at data. I wanted to follow up really quickly. Um, in particular, as we start to see more data, and I think data is going to drive the future.
Mm-hmm.
What I've seen, at least in the real estate world, is individuals are being increasingly hesitant to share data, and so in terms of that, certainly there are other ways to get data, like cell phone data and all sorts of more publicly available data.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think we're going to get into a world potentially, and you would be better suited than anyone we've yet had on the podcast to address this, of potentially more siloed data and folks using data within their own silo? Or do you foresee a more open data future in terms of real estate sharing?
Well, since you work in commercial real estate, you know how, I mean, I think like so much of the value prop is having that,
Yeah.
close to the chest. And so I can't, it is hard for me to imagine a more uh, open sharing, like of market data and things like that. But um, my hope is that things break down within firms that, even from my own experience, seeing sort of like the silos that can exist within large firms, if you start to share data across, even just internally, I think we could see a really huge shift.
Okay, very very interesting. I would certainly hope that we start to see more sharing of data. But as anybody knows, there's those CoStar reps that call you up trying to get comps, and it's hard. It's hard to get any broad comps on the market.
Yeah, I don't know. Your guess is really, that's like real crystal ball territory.
So instead of taking the crystal ball, let's
Mhm.
go back in time. Let's
Okay.
let's take the history book. And
Okay.
this is a favorite of mine. So Sarah, if you had to talk to young Sarah, let's say high school, college,
Hmm.
where would you see the future um, going for you? And what would be the advice you would give to that young Sarah?
Um, well, I have done so many different aspects of the built environment, and I think early on I felt like I had to choose, one route in this larger industry. And I think I've actually really benefited from sort of finding my way through it. And not to age myself, but young Sarah didn't, prop tech really didn't exist to go into. I mean, the AutoCAD that I was trained on is really different from what we're doing today, So the world is changing, and as we've talked about throughout this conversation, this industry is really changing. And so, the solutions that are available, the kinds of jobs that are available today are going to continue to evolve, and just stay curious.
Hey, staying curious is a great thing. And I think
Hmm.
that leads us into our third question that we always ask in the final four. And so I'm particularly curious, what's your favorite real estate or business book? Because look, I'm a voracious reader. I
Hmm.
I love to read, particularly I'd say business and nerdy real estate content.
Okay.
So, what's your book, or even a couple books that you would recommend to our readers and our listeners?
Well, I think this kind of ties in with some of the open data breaking down of silos that we talked about. But um, so one of my old professors at Yale wrote a book called Co-opetition. It's
Okay.
by Male Buff, and I reference this book to myself in conversation all the time because I just think the idea of co-opetition, especially in this industry, is really, really important. And from a real estate perspective, if you haven't run across or your listeners haven't run across Dror Polig, his book Rethinking Cities is another one of my favorites. I just think in general the content that he puts out is really future thinking about real estate, and I get a lot out of it.
Look, I think there's a phenomenal movement going on, particularly in the new urbanism movement,
Mm-hmm.
and I would be fascinated. I haven't read that one, but
Okay.
I'd be fascinated to pick it up at least maybe over spring break,
Yeah.
and uh, uh, and get a nice little read. So, the last question we're going to ask you is the most important question. So
Okay.
this is I won't let you dodge this one. I know you tried to dodge a couple, but I won't let you dodge this one. So
Never.
it's simply the whole reason why we created the podcast, which is to find important voices, particularly voices that aren't necessarily getting recognition within the industry,
Mhm.
and then learn a little bit more about them and maybe the future of the industry. So, who would you recommend, Sarah, to hop on the podcast next?
I'm going to recommend Cal Inman from Climate Check because
Okay.
I think that, especially in commercial real estate, there's going to be increased focus on reporting about climate risk, and we partner with them. And I think Cal is just a great guy to talk to about understanding how that can play into all of the different aspects that we've talked about on the conversation today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested to have a conversation about climate, particularly as the world gets more climate conscious or even just more economically conscious in terms of
Mhm.
energy usage. Um, that's certainly a great topic to have. Sarah, the second most important question that we can have on the podcast is to go and reach out and if our listeners or our anybody who's viewing the podcast today wants to go out and reach you
Yeah.
and find a little bit more about what you do, what's the best point of contact?
I encourage people to follow me on LinkedIn. So just Sara Maffey. Pretty easy to find, but that's probably the best way. And I am pretty responsive if you send me a message on LinkedIn. So I'd start there. Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today, and we have to have you on in the future and drill a little bit more into the data.
Yeah, you can just let me know, and I can be prepared with all the breakdowns. But thank you so much for having me, Gordon. It was
All
great.
right, thanks, Sarah.
All right, bye.
Thanks again to Sarah. We appreciate her insights. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please give us a like, a 5-star rating, or review. Your comments, interactions, and subscriptions truly matter and help us continue to provide quality guests. You can follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Gordon Lamphere with the Real Finance Podcast. Thank you for listening.